What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the September 2018 format. I wanted to take a couple days to kind of digest the new list and really think this over before I give you guys kind of my initial thoughts as to what the top 5 decks are going to be. Now, we do have the YCS 200 coming up at the end of next week, so I wanted to bring you guys this video before that, just in case you plan on attending, so you kind of have an idea of at least what I'm thinking the meta is going to shape up to be. But it seems that the general consensus is that a lot of people are thinking the same thing. So before we get into it though, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest supporters through the YouTube channel membership. So big shouts today to Steven and the Summoner. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through a YouTube channel membership, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off with number 5, I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Altergeist. Now, this may seem a little bit odd because Altergeist hasn't exactly had the best track record, especially last format. I mean, it's managed to get a couple tops here and there, but it's generally been eclipsed by just all the other decks that were dominating the format. Some of those decks specifically have a really good Altergeist matchup, but I think there's a couple things, especially due now to the new Forbidden and Limited list, that really kind of solidified my Altergeist pick in the number 5 slot. First off, Nightmare Goblin being banned actually is a really big deal because now Altergeist Meluseek actually can pretty much out an entire extra link board since those extra link boards no longer have their protection from targeting. Yes, you still have to bait out a Trigate Wizard, but pretty much baiting out a Trigate Wizard is essential to baiting out an extra link board in the first place. But once you do that, you can just go ahead, summon your Meluseek, attack directly, send any card to the graveyard because basically it dodges Nightmare Cerberus, it dodges Nightmare Phoenix, and it's a really cool thing that you can do since Nightmare Goblin is now banned. Another reason I have Altergeist on here is because it just got a free pass on this ban list. I mean, nothing got hit that is really just essential for the deck to perform. And so by looking at all the other decks that got hit relative to that, it kind of curbs their power and brings it down to that tier 2-ish level where Altergeist has kind of been hovering at, which means that it kind of puts it more in line to give Altergeist more favorable matchups. Altergeist is not a bad deck by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's just a combination of bad matchups and also just because of some of the way the format played out really just didn't contribute to the success of the deck overall. But now that we have the list and basically from what I've come to the conclusion what the format's going to start to look like, I think Altergeist has a pretty good shot to perform better now than it ever has before. But that brings us on to number 4, and with that, we have Draco. Now, Draco is kind of the solid tier 2 deck from previous format, so I feel like I had to give it that number 4 slot because the only thing that Draco really lost on this ban list was a single copy of Terraforming. So now Draco has only 5 copies of Dragonic Diagram instead of 6. Boo-hoo, right? But the thing is, Draco has been incredibly strong in the fact that it has so many different stun tools at its disposal that it's been able to pretty much stun the other top decks out and really just been able to nab several top spots from all the past premier events of last format. And since the ban list, even though it has changed things, it hasn't changed things enough to kind of really shake up Draco's positioning in the format. I still think it is a solid tier 2 deck. I think it is also very affordable, which is also very nice. And the thing is, it's relatively simple to pilot, which means that there's going to be less player error. And as long as you know how to use your floodgates and pretty much control the interactions of the deck in general, you should really have no problem taking this deck to a regional or even a YCS and seeing lots of success with it. I wouldn't be surprised at the 200th YCS if you see 1 or 2 of the top slots, maybe even more, going to true Draco. But that brings us on to number 3, and for number 3, I went with Trickstar. Now, I kind of need to divide Trickstar up here because there are a couple variants. You have just pure Trickstar, you have Trickstar Sky Sky Striker, but I'm kind of just talking about any variant that does play Trickstar. And the reason I'm kind of just molding them all together is because I don't exactly know which form of Trickstar is going to come out on top, but I definitely think Trickstar is still definitely in the top 5, because yes, there were several hits to the deck. I mean, Terraforming getting hit to 2 reduced the deck's consistency just a little bit. One less Scapegoat, while isn't the biggest deal, can make it that you're going to see Scapegoat 10% less of the time compared to what you were before, and also Hornet Drones going to 1 is a pretty significant hit for non-Sky Striker based decks. So I feel that with all of these things in mind, you have to realize that Trickstar, while it's still a very potent deck, I mean, Light Stage is still at 3, you've got Reincarnation still at 3, Droll and Lockbird still at 3, hell, Called by the Grave went to 2, so Droll Reincarnation actually got even easier if you think of it that way, but Trickstar is still a very powerful deck for what it's worth. And what I like about it is that you can kind of take Trickstar and adapt it to so many different formats, and that's why I think makes the deck so resilient, because you can choose to incorporate floodgates like Goes in Match if you feel like that's necessary. You can choose to make a more aggressive build with the Mech Knights, and I guess time will tell whether or not the Sky Strikers getting hit, or excuse me, Sky Striker Hornet Drones getting hit will really affect the Trickstar Sky Striker variant. I think it will marginally, but I think people are still going to try to play it because you still have access to Afterburner, you still have Widow Anchor, and playing your 3 copies of Engage is still so powerful for the deck that, yes, while you only have 1 drones, it is recyclable through Kagari, and I feel that the deck is just too good, and basically it has shown how powerful it was in the previous format, that it's still going to be a very heavy contender, and honestly could win the 200th YCS. We'll just have to wait and see. But speaking of Sky Striker, that brings us on to number 2, and Sky Striker is in that slot. Sky Striker got a really big boost from this list by having Nightmare Goblin get banned, because although Hornet Drones did go to 1, you have to realize that when it comes to Sky Striker, that's largely irrelevant because they still have 3 copies of Ray, they've got Engage to search Ray, so yeah, it does hurt, but it doesn't hurt Sky Striker pure as much because they already have so many copies of Ray as it is that it really doesn't affect their consistency. How some Sky Striker builds were actually only playing like 2 Hornet Drones just because it was too many copies of Ray and wasn't really doing the deck a lot of good. One of the biggest gifts though that they got on the ban list was A, not having anything else hit besides Hornet Drones, but B, again, Nightmare Goblin getting banned is a really big deal. This puts a lot of strength in a card like Widow Anchor because now you're going to be able to target your opponent's monsters, especially on extra link boards, and you're going to be able to either negate their effects, which means you can bait out Trigate Wizard, or you can just take the monster if you have a high enough spell count, which is going to break the extra link and put you in a pretty advantageous position to start taking back over the board. That means you could potentially make your Afterburners live if you take something like Cerberus. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with Widow Anchor, and I think this is a highly, highly underrated card going into this format specifically. So the fact that Sky Striker has not only 3 copies of Widow Anchor, but you have 3 copies of Engage to search your 3 Widow Anchors, and you have Kagari to be able to recycle them if you really need it. This deck is so powerful, it's so consistent, and we've already seen it doing very well in the previous format that I definitely think it's going to be one of, if not the best decks moving into the format. I just think there's one deck that has a slight edge over it, and that's what we're going to get into a little bit later. But Sky Striker's still looking very strong. If you want a very good deck moving to the next format, I'd highly recommend investing in Sky Striker now, because I think it's going to be a very solid pick. Before we get on to number 1 though, I do want to give a shout out to an honorable mention, and that's going to be Mech Knight Invoked. Now, Mech Knight Invoked really didn't get hit that hard on the ban list. Hornet Drones going to 1 and Scapegoat going to 2 were kind of the biggest offenders there, but realistically, Alistair's still at 3, Invocation's still at 3, Makaba's still at 3, I guess Terraforming going to 2 also had a marginal effect on it, but realistically, I still think the deck is very good. It's fragile to the extent that just hitting Alistair can kind of stop the deck outright, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the deck is extremely potent and extremely powerful. Alistair the Invoker of Madness is a very, very strong card, and you have to realize that Super Polymerization is legal now, and while that may not be a big deal, Super Polymerization can be used in Invoked, and that could just mean some absolutely crazy shenanigans. I don't think it's enough to take the deck all the way to the top, but I think you're definitely going to start to see some really crazy plays involving Super Poly that can also also result in some very strong disruption. So definitely keep an eye on Mech Knight Invoked. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a Top Cutter 2 from the 200th YCS, but I don't really think it's going to do much more than that. But moving on to my number 1 meta deck of the September 2018 format, I have to give it to Goki, and I know a lot of people may not agree with this, but I still genuinely think Goki is the strongest deck of the format. But why do I think that? Well, you have to realize Goki can still extra link with just 2 cards. Hell, it can actually extra link with 1 card depending on the variant. A Hero Lives equals a single extra link just in Goki, and if you don't open Hero Lives, if you're playing a hero variant, you can still do it with just like Armageddon Knight and any other warrior monster, and that's really, really good. But taking the hero component out of it, you can just extra link with like a Super X and another warrior monster, or basically any Goki and any warrior. And the fact that you're still able to do that, the fact you're still able to do all the Gumblar shenanigans, I think puts the deck in a very, very strong position. And a lot of decks really aren't just going to be able to deal with just 6 monsters sitting on the board that are co-linked with a Trigate Wizard, being under a Cerberus and Phoenix protection, sometimes Gumblar ripping 2 to 4 cards out of their hand. It's just such a powerful deck. One metaphor that I like is people comparing this to when Spiral got hit from being a tier 0 deck. Remember when Spiral got hit and there were those hits to, I believe, Drone and Quick Fix, and those hits were definitely justified, but then what ended up happening was Spiral was still the best deck of the format, it just wasn't like a tier 0 format. Now, I don't think Goki ever evolved to that place, but the thing you have to realize is, while Goki did suffer some hits, I don't think it was hit significantly hard enough that I feel it's in a very similar position to Spiral was not too long ago, that it's still going to be the best deck, even though it's been slightly hindered in multiple different ways. People can't play the rank 3 build anymore, that Invoker is banned, but realistically, I don't think that's going to stop people. Isolde is still a hell of a card. The fact that the deck is just able to completely spam out so much with so little, I had to give it the number 1 slot. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the top 5 meta decks going into this new format. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.